Hey everyone, and welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. To all our viewers across America, Europe, Asia, and beyond, thank you for being part of our worldwide community. We hope you enjoy today's story, so let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Promise. The anesthesia wore off slowly, like a fog lifting from a winter morning. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of the recovery room, my mouth cotton dry and my thoughts scattered. Dr. Landry's face swam into view, his expression professional but pleased. "Surgery went perfectly, Mr. Delacroix," he said, checking my vitals. "The spinal fusion was successful, but recovery will be challenging. You'll need consistent help for at least 6 weeks." I nodded, wincing at the movement. At 48, I wasn't bouncing back from injuries like I used to. The construction accident 3 months ago had shattered 2 vertebrae, and after exhausting less invasive options, surgery became inevitable. My wife Melanie's face appeared next, her blonde hair perfectly styled even for a hospital visit. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. After 23 years of marriage, I could read every micro-expression on her face. Something was off. "Don't worry, babe," she said, squeezing my hand. "We'll take care of everything." Our children, Preston and Bailey, stood awkwardly behind their mother. Preston, 22 and fresh out of the business school I'd paid for, fidgeted with his phone. Bailey, 19 and home from her sophomore year at UCLA, at least managed a smile that seemed genuine. "Yeah, Dad," Bailey said. "We've got it all arranged." "The whole family will help," Melanie added. "The doctor says you'll need supervision, help with medication, bathing, everything. We've cleared our schedules." I should have noticed the glance that passed between them, fleeting but loaded with something I was too drugged to interpret. Instead, I felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," I rasped. "I know this isn't how any of you wanted to spend your summer." Before my accident, I'd been Raymond Delacroix, the unstoppable force behind Delacroix Construction. I'd built the company from nothing after escaping my father's shadow. Hank Delacroix had been a mean drunk who taught me only what not to become. I'd worked my way up from day laborer to foreman, saved every penny, and started my own business at 25. Now we handled major commercial projects across 3 states. I'd fought for everything I had, and I'd given my family everything I never had growing up: stability, luxury, opportunity. I'd missed dinners and weekends to build something lasting for them. Now, for the first time, I needed them. The nurse provided detailed instructions. Dr. Landry explained to my family, "Mr. Delacroix will need help getting in and out of bed, bathing, and managing his medication schedule, which is absolutely critical. The first 2 weeks are especially important." "We understand," Melanie said firmly. "Ray is our priority." As they wheeled me toward the exit the next morning, I spotted Melanie texting rapidly, her manicured nails clicking against her screen. Preston and Bailey huddled together, whispering. I blamed my unease on the medication. The first day home went smoothly. Melanie helped me to the hospital bed we'd rented for the downstairs guest room. Bailey brought my medications on schedule, and Preston helped me to the bathroom when needed. I drifted in and out of a painkiller haze, grateful for their support. I woke early the second morning to find Melanie packing a suitcase. "What's going on?" I asked, struggling to sit up. She jumped slightly. "Oh, you're awake. I was going to talk to you about this at breakfast." She sat on the edge of the bed, not quite meeting my eyes. There's been a slight change of plans. Something cold settled in my stomach. "What kind of change?" "You remember that Lake Tahoe trip we booked months ago? The one with the non-refundable deposit?" I stared at her. "The family vacation? You're still going?" "Now." She sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "Ray, it's a 5-star resort. We'd lose thousands. Preston and Bailey have been looking forward to it all semester." "But the doctor said—" "I've got it all figured out," she interrupted. "Meals prepped in the fridge, medications labeled by day and time. We'll only be gone 10 days, and you can call us anytime." 10 days. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. "Melanie, I can barely get to the bathroom alone. We've set everything up in reach. And I've asked Sonia to check on you." Sonia was our cleaning lady who came once a week. She was 65 years old and barely spoke English. "You promised." My voice cracked embarrassingly. "All of you promised to help me." Melanie's face hardened slightly. Don't make this difficult, Ray. We've been planning this forever. Preston and Bailey appeared in the doorway, already dressed for travel. Dad, we're really sorry, Bailey said, looking genuinely conflicted. But Mom says you'll be okay, and nothing changes the fact that we're going, Preston finished firmly. The resort has that business networking event I told you about, remember? I can't miss that opportunity. I looked at my family, really looked at them, and saw strangers. These people, who I'd sacrificed everything for, couldn't sacrifice 10 days of vacation for me. When do you leave? I asked quietly. Our flight's at noon, Melanie said, relief evident in her voice. I've left detailed instructions on the kitchen counter. For hours later, they were gone. I lay in my bed, pain radiating through my body, and listened to the silence of my empty house. Chapter 2. Abandoned. Day 3 after surgery was when everything fell apart. The medication schedule became confused. Was it time for the high-dose painkiller or the anti-inflammatory? The typed instructions Melanie left were unclear, and my mind was foggy from pain and previous doses. I called her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with Preston and Bailey. I managed to drag myself to the kitchen, one excruciating step at a time, using the walker the hospital had provided. The prepped meals Melanie promised were just sandwich ingredients and 3 frozen dinners. The microwave was too high for me to safely use while balancing on my walker. By evening, hunger and pain had become twin torturers. I finally reached Melanie on the 5th try. We're at dinner, Ray, she answered, sounding annoyed. The background noise told me they were at a restaurant, laughing, clinking glasses. Can this wait? No, it can't, I said through gritted teeth. I need help figuring out which medication. Hold on, she interrupted. I heard her moving somewhere quieter. What's the problem? I labeled everything. The instructions aren't clear, and I can barely move, Melanie. I haven't eaten since breakfast. A brief silence. You're a grown man, Ray. Figure it out. I had major spinal surgery 3 days ago. My voice rose with disbelief. The doctor said I needed help. Don't guilt-trip me, she snapped. We're on vacation, not your servants. The casual cruelty of her words stunned me into silence. In the background, I heard a male voice asking if everything was okay. The voice wasn't Preston's. Who's that? I asked softly. A pause. Just the waiter, she said too quickly. Look, I need to go. Follow the pill schedule as best you can. We'll call tomorrow. They didn't call tomorrow. Or the next day. I survived on water from the bathroom sink and crackers I could reach from the bed. The pain became a living thing, clawing at my insides. On day 5, I dragged myself to my office down the hall, determined to call my doctor. My desk phone was dead, the line disconnected. My cell phone was nearly out of battery, and I couldn't find my charger. In desperation, I booted up my computer to email my doctor, and that's when everything changed. Melanie had left her email logged in. At first, I thought I was hallucinating from pain and medication. The email chain was between my wife and someone named Benjamin Walsh. The subject line, Tahoe Getaway. Can't wait to feel your body against mine with nothing but the lake view as witness, read one message from Miss Benjamin. Ray's surgery was perfect timing, Melanie had replied. The kids think it's just a family vacation. 10 days of freedom. My hands trembled as I kept reading. The affair had been going on for over a year. Benjamin Walsh was my business partner Neil Walsh's cousin, a fact that added another layer of betrayal. The emails revealed that Preston and Bailey knew about the affair. They didn't approve, but they'd agreed to participate in this family vacation because Benjamin had promised Preston introductions to investors and Bailey his summer internship at his marketing firm. I read every email, each word a knife. Then I noticed a notification for a shared photo album. With numb fingers, I clicked it. There they were, my family and my wife's lover, posing in front of a luxury lake house. Melanie wrapped in Benjamin's arms. Preston shaking hands with men in expensive suits. Bailey lounging by a pool. All of them smiling, not a care in the world, while I lay neglected in agony. Thanks for showing me who you really are, I whispered to the empty room. I managed one phone call before my cell died completely. Not to Melanie or my children. Not even to Dr. Landry. I called Hugh Bannister, my oldest friend and the only person who knew everything about me, including the darkness I kept buried. "Hugh," I said when he answered. "I need you." He arrived 6 hours later with supplies, medication, and cold fury in his eyes. "Jesus Christ, Ray," he said, taking in my unwashed body, the empty water glasses, the confusion of pills. "They left you like this." "They left me for dead," I corrected quietly. "And now I'm going to return the favor." Chapter 3. The Decision. Hugh moved into my guest room for the next 2 weeks. A retired military medic turned private security consultant, he approached my recovery with tactical precision. He administered medications, changed bandages, helped me bathe, and cooked actual meals. More importantly, he listened as I poured out every bitter detail of my family's betrayal. "They've been laughing at me for God knows how long," I said one evening as we sat on the back patio. I was finally mobile enough to venture outside with a cane. My own children chose a stranger over their father because of what he could offer them. Hugh's weathered face remained impassive, but I knew he was furious on my behalf. We'd grown up together in the same hardscrabble neighborhood, had each other's backs through every fight and setback. Hugh had been the best man at my wedding and godfather to both my children. "What are you thinking, Ray?" he asked carefully. He knew me well enough to see the cold calculation behind my pain. "I'm thinking it's time they learned what it feels like to be abandoned," I replied. "I've got 2 weeks before they return." "That's enough time." "For what?" I turned to him, decision crystallizing. "To disappear. Not just leave, disappear, so completely they'll never find me unless I want to be found." Hugh nodded slowly. "You have the means." He was referring to what we'd always called my ghost protocol, a detailed escape plan I'd created years ago during a period of paranoia after my company's first major success. I'd established alternate identities, offshore accounts, and property holdings that couldn't be traced back to me. I never thought I'd use them against my own family. "They think I'm just a wallet with legs," I said bitterly. "A provider who can be discarded when inconvenient. They have no idea who I really am or what I'm capable of." "What about the company?" Hugh asked. "Neil can buy my shares. He's wanted to for years." My jaw tightened, though I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what his cousin has done. Over the next few days, as my physical strength gradually returned, Hugh helped me set my plan in motion. We transferred funds, contacted my lawyer, and prepared documentation. I recorded videos on my phone documenting my condition and the abandoned state of the house. I forwarded the damning emails to secure accounts. By the time Melanie texted that they'd be home in 2 days, every trace of Raymond Delacroix, the devoted father and husband, was ready to vanish. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Hugh asked the night before their return. "Once you trigger this, there's no going back." I looked around at the house I'd built, filled with memories both good and bad. For 23 years, I believed I was building a legacy of love. Now I understood I'd just been building a comfortable prison for myself. "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied. "They made their choice. Now I'm making mine." 2 days later, my family returned from Lake Tahoe to find an empty house. No trace of my hospital bed, medication, or personal belongings. Just a note on the kitchen counter that read, "I received your message loud and clear. Now you'll receive mine." The game had begun. Chapter 4. Ghost Protocol. The Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina offered perfect seclusion while I recovered and planned. Hugh owned a cabin there, off-grid and untraceable. As summer heat gave way to fall coolness, I rebuilt my body through rigorous physical therapy and my mind through meticulous strategy. 42 messages from Bailey today, Hugh reported, checking the burner phone we used to monitor my family's desperate attempts at contact. Most of them variations on "please talk to us," were begging. I continued my push-ups, face impassive. And Melanie? 28 calls, 15 texts. She's threatening to file a missing persons report. I snorted. Let her. I left a video with my lawyer explaining I'm leaving voluntarily. The police won't waste resources. According to our surveillance, my disappearance had thrown my family into chaos. Melanie had to explain to friends, neighbors, and business associates why her husband had vanished immediately after major surgery. The story she concocted that I was at a specialized rehabilitation facility was already unraveling. Preston had been forced to put his networking opportunities on hold to help manage the company in my absence. Bailey had returned to UCLA, but was failing classes, distracted by the family drama. And Benjamin Walsh had mysteriously stepped back from the relationship, sensing complications. "They still think this is temporary," I said, toweling off sweat. "That I'm having a midlife crisis or tantrum. They expect me to come crawling back when I run out of money or resolve." Hugh raised an eyebrow. "And that's where they're wrong." "Catastrophically wrong," I agreed. My plan required patience. While my family scrambled to maintain appearances, I was reconstructing myself. The beard I'd grown disguised my face. Daily mountain hikes had hardened my body beyond its pre-injury state. Even my voice had changed. I'd worked with a dialect coach online to adopt a slight southern drawl. Raymond Delacroix was disappearing, and in his place, Robert Dawson was emerging, a successful real estate investor with a background no one would question too deeply. 3 months after my disappearance, I was ready for phase 2. Hugh drove me to Charlotte, where I boarded a private plane to the Cayman Islands. There, I met with bankers who knew me only as Robert Dawson, activated financial instruments established years earlier, and set in motion the economic noose that would slowly tighten around my family's necks. "You're really going to let them lose the house?" Hugh asked during our encrypted video call that evening. "I provided for them generously for decades," I replied coolly. "The house, the cars, the vacations, the education, all paid for by the man they abandoned without food or medication. They made their choice." "And Neil Walsh, your business partner?" My expression hardened. "I've sold him my shares at fair market value. But he's about to discover that his cousin's affair with my wife violated multiple morality clauses in our partnership agreement." "You're scorching the earth, Ray." "No," I corrected. "I'm just removing what was never actually theirs. They'll keep their clothes, personal items, and whatever they've saved independently. But everything I built, that's coming with me." By Christmas, 6 months after my disappearance, the effects were becoming clear. Melanie had been forced to sell her luxury car to cover mounting debts. Preston, unable to manage in my absence, had been sidelined at the company as Neil brought in experienced management. Bailey had dropped out of UCLA, unable to afford tuition after the college fund I'd established mysteriously froze. Their text messages had evolved from angry demands to confused pleas to desperate bargaining. "Dad, please," Bailey wrote in her latest message. "Mom had to take a job at the mall. We might lose the house. Whatever we did, we're sorry. Just tell us what you want us to do." I didn't respond, but I took no pleasure in their suffering. This wasn't about punishment. It was about consequences. For the first time in their privileged lives, my wife and children were experiencing the harsh reality of betrayal. The reality I'd lived through in that empty house, in pain and alone. In January, I returned to the United States, not to my former home, but to Denver, Colorado, where Robert Dawson purchased a penthouse apartment with sweeping mountain views. With my new identity firmly established, I began building a new real estate development company, focusing on sustainable, affordable housing, the antithesis of the luxury properties my family had always expected. They hired a private investigator. Hugh informed me during his first visit to my new home. "Amateur hour. The guy's looking for Raymond Delacroix, not Robert Dawson." I nodded, gazing out at the snow-capped Rockies. "And Benjamin Walsh?" Hugh's mouth twitched in what might have been satisfaction. "Left town after his cousin's business took a nosedive. Apparently, he's not interested in Melanie now that the money's gone." "Of course not," I said quietly. "He wanted what I built, not who she is." "The final pieces are in place," Hugh said. "Are you ready for the last phase?" I turned to face my oldest friend. "It's time for the Delacroix family to learn that actions have permanent consequences." Chapter 5, Visible Ghosts. Spring brought renewal to Denver, but final reckonings to my former family. On the anniversary of my surgery, a date etched in my memory by pain and betrayal, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. First came the certified letters from my attorney, delivered simultaneously to Melanie, Preston, and Bailey at the modest apartment they now shared. The letters outlined in precise legal language exactly what they had lost and why. Melanie's divorce papers cited abandonment and adultery, with copies of the incriminating emails attached. Her settlement, exactly what our prenuptial agreement specified for infidelity, nothing. Preston received documentation showing that his shares in Delacroix Construction had been legally forfeited when he breached his fiduciary duty by aiding in his mother's deception during my medical emergency. Bailey received notice that while her college trust had been frozen, it wasn't gone. It had been converted to a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, with the stipulation that she could never benefit from it. Each letter ended with the same statement. Raymond Delacroix has moved forward with his life and requests no further contact. That should be the end of it, I told Hugh during our weekly encrypted call. They know the truth now. They can accept it and move on. Hugh's silence told me he disagreed. What? I demanded. You know your family, Ray. This won't be the end. He was right. Within days, my lawyer reported that Melanie was contesting the divorce, claiming duress and abandonment on my part. Preston had consulted 3 different attorneys about challenging the share forfeiture. Bailey had shown up at the Scholarship Foundation's office, causing a scene. Their desperation wasn't surprising. In the months since my disappearance, their lives had unraveled completely. The house had been foreclosed on. Melanie's job at the mall hadn't lasted. Preston had been fully removed from the company after Neil Walsh discovered his complicity in covering up Melanie's affair with his cousin. Bailey was waiting tables at a diner instead of finishing her degree. They were experiencing exactly what I'd intended, the consequences of their choices. What I hadn't expected was Benjamin Walsh's reappearance in Melanie's life. My surveillance reported that he'd returned, supposedly to support her through this difficult time. In reality, he was after the one asset he believed she still had, potential claims to my fortune. It was time to become visible. Under my new identity as Robert Dawson, I arranged to purchase the building where Melanie worked. A routine staff meeting was called, with a new owner scheduled to address employees. I arrived in an expensive suit, my beard now stylishly trimmed, hair slightly longer and touched with distinguished gray. Melanie didn't recognize me at first. She sat in the back row, slumped with exhaustion in her retail uniform. Only when I began speaking, letting my cultivated accent slip slightly, did her head snap up. Our eyes met across the room, and I watched the blood drain from her face. As the new owner, I continued smoothly, ignoring her visible shock. I'll be making some changes to operations. Those who have demonstrated loyalty and work ethic will be rewarded. Those who haven't, I smiled thinly. Well, the market is competitive these days. After the meeting, I retreated to my office and waited. Within minutes, there was a frantic knock at the door. Come in, Melanie, I called. She burst in, trembling. Ray, is it really you? Where have you? Why did you? She moved toward me, arms outstretched. I held up a hand, stopping her. That's not my name anymore, and you've lost the right to ask me anything. Please, she begged, tears spilling. You have to listen. I've lost everything. The kids are suffering, much like I suffered alone after surgery. I asked mildly, when you were enjoying Lake Tahoe with your lover? Her face crumpled. It was a terrible mistake. I didn't think. That's correct. You didn't think I would ever stand up for myself. You didn't think your comfortable life could disappear. You didn't think consequences would apply to you. Ray, Robert, whatever you're calling yourself, she whispered. I'm still your wife. Not for much longer, I replied. And this meeting isn't about reconciliation. It's about clarity. I want you to understand exactly why your life has fallen apart, and I want you to explain it to our children. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside is documentation of everything. The emails, the photos from your vacation, the text messages between you and Benjamin planning how to leave me alone after surgery. I want Preston and Bailey to see who their mother really is. They'll hate me, she whispered. Perhaps, I agreed. Or perhaps they'll recognize their own complicity. Either way, they deserve the truth. And then what? She asked. After we've seen all this, what happens? I leaned back in my chair. Then nothing. Your life continues as it is. My life continues as Robert Dawson. The only difference is that illusions will be stripped away. You can't mean that, she said desperately. After 23 years, you can't just... Actually, I can. You taught me that, Melanie. When you said, we're on vacation, not your servants, you taught me that decades of marriage mean nothing when convenience is at stake. I stood, indicating our meeting was over. You have 48 hours to share those documents with Preston and Bailey. After that, I'll do it myself. And Benjamin? She asked quietly. I smiled coldly. Mr. Walsh is about to have his own reckoning. Chapter 6. Web of Consequences. Benjamin Walsh lived in a glass and steel downtown loft that screamed new money. Exactly the type of flashy, substanceless dwelling that would appeal to a man who pursued married women and leveraged family connections for business advantage. I studied his habits for a week before making my move. Every morning, he left his building at precisely 7:15 a.m., walked to a local coffee shop, then took his BMW to his office. His predictability made him vulnerable. On a crisp Monday morning, I waited in the coffee shop, newspaper raised to obscure my face. When Benjamin entered, I watched him order his usual complicated espresso drink, then followed him to the sugar station. "Excuse me," I said, deliberately bumping into him and causing him to spill his drink. "Hey, watch it," he snapped, then froze as recognition dawned. "Delacroix, let's talk outside," I said quietly. "Unless you prefer, I make a scene about how you slept with my wife while I was recovering from surgery." His face paled, and he followed me to a secluded bench in a nearby park. "How did you find me?" he asked, visibly nervous. "Finding people is easy when you have resources," I replied. "And despite your best efforts with my wife, I still have considerable resources. Look, whatever happened between Melanie and me was a conspiracy to abandon an injured man," I finished. "Don't pretend it was a love story, Benjamin. We both know you were after my connections, my lifestyle. You wanted what I built." He swallowed hard. "What do you want from me? Money? I don't have much left since Neil's company." "I'm well aware of your financial situation," I interrupted. "After all, I engineered it." His eyes widened. "You? But how?" "The same way I'm going to engineer what happens next if you don't follow my instructions exactly." I handed him an envelope. Inside are plane tickets to Phoenix and information on a job opportunity. Your qualifications have been slightly enhanced to ensure you get the position. "You want me to move to Arizona?" he asked incredulously. "I want you out of my family's life permanently," I corrected. "The job is legitimate. The apartment is paid for 6 months. Consider it a fresh start. One you don't deserve, but I'm providing anyway. And if I refuse?" I smiled thinly. "Then the evidence of how you manipulated my children with false promises while sleeping with their mother gets sent to every business contact in your phone. The documentation of your involvement in my abandonment goes to the police to explore potential criminal negligence. And the records of your previous affairs, yes, I know about those too, go to the women's husbands." Benjamin stared at me, hatred and fear warring in his expression. "You're insane." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm thorough. You have 48 hours to accept the job and be on that plane. After that, the consequences begin." I stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. If you contact Melanie or my children ever again, even to say goodbye, all the evidence drops immediately. Am I clear?" He nodded mutely. "Good. Enjoy Phoenix, Mr. Walsh. I hear the dry heat is good for people with character deficiencies." That evening, I met Preston at his cramped one-bedroom apartment. Unlike his mother, he recognized me immediately when I knocked on his door. "Dad," he whispered, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "You're alive." "Disappointed?" I asked, stepping past him into the apartment. "No. God, no. We've been looking everywhere for you." "Why did you?" His voice broke. "Why did you destroy everything? The company, our home, my future." I surveyed his living space, a far cry from the luxury he'd grown up with. "I didn't destroy anything, Preston. I simply took back what was mine." "But, did you read the documents your mother received?" I interrupted. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "The emails, the arrangements for the trip. You knew about her affair with Benjamin Walsh before we even left for the hospital, didn't you?" His silence was answer enough. "You chose a business networking opportunity over your father's health and safety," I continued. You chose Benjamin's empty promises over your obligations to the man who gave you everything. I thought you'd be okay, he mumbled. Mom said, your mother lied. I cut in. And you chose to believe her because it was convenient. Because a luxury vacation and career opportunities mattered more than basic human decency. Preston sank onto his worn couch, head in his hands. So, this is punishment? Taking everything away. This is reality, I corrected. You're experiencing the natural consequence of your choices. For the first time in your life, you're not being protected from your own actions. What do you want from me? He asked, looking up with reddened eyes. Nothing, I replied simply. I want nothing from you, Preston. Not a relationship, not forgiveness, not understanding. I simply wanted you to see me one last time and know exactly why things happened as they did. That's it. You're just going to disappear again. I moved toward the door. Raymond Delacroix disappeared a year ago. I'm Robert Dawson now, and Robert has no children. Dad, please, he begged, rising. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I paused at the door. That's the final lesson, Preston. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals can't be undone. The last visit was to Bailey at the diner where she worked. I sat in her section, menu raised, watching her hurry between tables. Her face was thinner, her movements harried. When she finally approached my table, she didn't look up from her notepad. What can I get you today? She asked mechanically. The truth would be nice, I replied in my natural voice. Her head snapped up, eyes widening in shock. Dad? She whispered, nearly dropping her notepad. I gestured to the empty seat across from me. Sit down, Bailey. She glanced nervously at her manager, then slid into the booth. Where have you been? Why did I leave? I finished. Or why did I take back everything I provided? The answer to both is in the documents your mother should have shared with you. Tears filled her eyes. She showed us. The emails, the photos, everything. But Dad, I didn't know how bad it was when we left. I swear I thought you'd be okay. You chose a poolside vacation over helping your father recover from spinal surgery, I said evenly. You chose Benjamin Walsh's empty internship promises over basic human decency. I was wrong, she admitted, a tear sliding down her cheek. We were all wrong. But does that mean you have to destroy our lives completely? I had to drop out of UCLA. Mom can barely afford rent. Preston is experiencing the natural consequences of his choices. I finished. As are you. As is your mother. So that's it. No forgiveness. No second chances. I studied my daughter, seeing both the woman she'd become and the little girl who once sat on my shoulders at construction sites, proudly watching her daddy build things. Forgiveness requires remorse, Bailey. Not remorse for getting caught or facing consequences. Real remorse for the harm caused. I have yet to hear anyone in this family express that. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for leaving you alone when you needed us. For choosing a vacation over helping you. For everything. For a moment, something cracked in my resolve. A hairline fracture in the wall I'd built around my heart. Then I remembered lying on the floor in agony, unable to reach food or medication, while my daughter posed for Instagram photos with my wife's lover. I believe that you think you're sorry, I said finally. But true remorse changes behavior, not just words. You had 19 years of my unconditional love and support. You threw it away in a moment when it became inconvenient. I stood, leaving money for a tip that would exceed her entire day's earnings. Goodbye, Bailey. I wish you well in the life you've chosen. Her hand shot out, grabbing mine. Will we ever see you again? I gently removed her fingers from my wrist. Raymond Delacroix is gone. Robert Dawson has no daughter. As I walked away, I heard her call after me, we still love you, Dad. I didn't look back. Love without loyalty is just another empty promise, and I'd had enough of those to last a lifetime. Chapter 7. Phoenix Rising. 1 year to the day after my family abandoned me, I stood on the balcony of my Denver penthouse, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Robert Dawson's real estate development company had flourished, specializing in affordable, sustainable housing that was the antithesis of the luxury properties my former family had taken for granted. My phone buzzed. Hugh, calling with his weekly update. They're still looking for you, he reported without preamble. Melanie hired another private investigator, but they're still searching for Raymond Delacroix, not Robert Dawson. And Benjamin Walsh? Took the Arizona job. Smart move on his part. I nodded, though Hugh couldn't see me. Benjamin had recognized that crossing me would be catastrophic. In his own way, he'd shown more sense than my own family. Any change with Preston or Bailey? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Hugh paused. Preston's working construction now. Entry-level with a commercial outfit in Charlotte. Bailey's back in school, community college, working 2 jobs to pay for it. Something tightened in my chest. Despite everything, hearing that my children were rebuilding their lives stirred complicated emotions. Ray, Hugh said carefully, it's been a year. You made your point. They've suffered the consequences. Maybe it's time to what? I interrupted sharply. Forgive and forget? Welcome them back with open arms? They left me to suffer alone, Hugh. They chose luxury and convenience over basic human decency. I'm not saying forgive them, Hugh replied. I'm saying maybe it's time to stop actively monitoring them, to truly move forward as Robert Dawson. I fell silent, considering his words. Was I truly moving forward if I remained tethered to their lives, even as an observer? I'll think about it, I finally said. But first, there's one more thing I need to do. That evening, I attended a charity gala for affordable housing initiatives in Denver. As one of the major donors, Robert Dawson was expected to make an appearance. What no one expected was for Neil Walsh to also be in attendance. I spotted him across the ballroom, grayer and more weathered than when I'd last seen him. Our eyes met, and recognition dawned on his face. Not of Raymond Delacroix, but of the mysterious investor who had systematically dismantled portions of his business over the past year. He approached cautiously, drink in hand. Robert Dawson, I presume? Your reputation precedes you. As does yours, Mr. Walsh, I replied coolly. Though I understand your company has faced challenges recently. His jaw tightened. Nothing we can't overcome. Business has cycles. Indeed it does. Much like loyalty and betrayal. Confusion crossed his features, then slowly transformed into dawning horror as he studied my face more carefully. My God, he whispered. Ray, I smiled thinly. That name no longer applies to me. But I'm curious. How much did you know about your cousin's relationship with my wife while I was recovering from surgery? Neil paled visibly. I swear I had no idea until after you disappeared. When I found out, I cut ties with Benjamin immediately. Yet you benefited from my absence, I noted. Acquire my shares at market value, took full control of the company. That was business, not personal, he protested. I thought you'd abandoned everything. I abandoned nothing, I corrected. I reclaimed what was mine and removed myself from people who had proven unworthy of trust. Neil glanced around nervously. What do you want from me? Is this some kind of blackmail? I laughed softly. No, Neil. I have everything I want already. This conversation is merely closure. A courtesy to inform you that Robert Dawson's investment group will no longer be targeting your holdings. Relief washed over his face. You are backing off? I've made my point, I replied. Your business will survive, though perhaps never return to its former glory. Consider it the cost of associating with people who lack basic decency. And my cousin, he asked hesitantly, is enjoying a new life in Phoenix. I suggest you let him remain there undisturbed. As I turned to leave, Neil caught my arm. Ray, Robert, whatever you're calling yourself now. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened to you. No one deserves that kind of betrayal. I regarded him silently for a moment. You're right, Neil. No one deserves that kind of betrayal. Remember that the next time you're tempted to look the other way for family's sake. Walking away, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The last business connection to my old life had been addressed. Robert Dawson was truly free to exist without Raymond Delacroix's shadows. That night, I called Hugh. You're right, I said when he answered. It's time to stop monitoring them. Whatever they do now is their own path. Hugh's relief was palpable. I think that's wise, Ray. You've built something good as Robert. Don't let the past poison it. There's just one more thing, I added. I want you to arrange a trust for Bailey's education. Anonymous. Enough to cover community college and transfer to a state university if she maintains her grades. She's working hard to rebuild. I won't stand in the way of that. And Preston? Melanie? Nothing, I said firmly. Preston chose his path with open eyes. And Melanie made her choice long ago. You're a complicated man, my friend, Hugh said quietly. No, I corrected. Just a man who understands that not all betrayals are equal. Chapter 8. Confrontations. 3 days after my conversation with Neil Walsh, as I was leaving my office in downtown Denver, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows of the parking garage. Hello, Robert, Melanie said, using my new name deliberately. Or do you still answer to Ray when no one's around? I kept my expression neutral, though inwardly I was calculating how she'd found me. Neil Walsh was the obvious answer. Melanie, I acknowledged, you're a long way from home. She looked different, thinner, with stress lines around her eyes, and cheaper clothes than she'd been accustomed to. But her spine was straight, her gaze direct. Home, she laughed bitterly. You took our home. You took everything. I took back what was mine. I corrected. What you forfeited when you chose a luxury vacation with your lover over basic human decency. She flinched, but didn't back down. I've a year to think about what happened, to recognize my mistakes and live with the consequences. But this vendetta goes beyond justice, Ray. This is cruelty. Cruelty? I raised an eyebrow. Like leaving a man who just had spinal surgery alone without proper food or medication. That kind of cruelty. I was wrong, she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. What I did was selfish and callous, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. Yet here you are, seeking what? Forgiveness? Restoration? Money? Closure, she said simply. And to deliver these. She held out a manila envelope. When I made no move to take it, she placed it on the hood of my car. Letters from Preston and Bailey, she explained. Things they need to say to you, whether you want to hear them or not. And from you, I asked coldly. I've said my piece to your face. I wasn't a good wife, Ray. Even before everything. I took you for granted. Resented your work hours while enjoying the lifestyle they provided. When Benjamin showed interest, it fed something in me that I should have addressed honestly with you instead. Her candor was unexpected. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved, direct, unflinching. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said. Nothing excuses what I did, she agreed. But I want you to know that while you've been systematically destroying our lives, I've been recognizing how I destroyed something precious long before you disappeared. She turned to leave, then paused. The divorce papers. I've signed them. They're in there too. You win, Ray. You're free. I've been free for a year, I replied. She looked back, eyes glistening. Have you? Because the man I married, for all his flaws and mine, wasn't cruel. He was tough, demanding, sometimes distant, but never cruel. This elaborate punishment scheme? This isn't freedom. It's a prison of your own making. After she left, I sat in my car for a long time, the envelope untouched beside me. Finally, I opened it. Inside were 3 letters, one from Melanie, despite what she'd said, and one each from Preston and Bailey. I read them in the silent car, each word landing like a stone in still water. Preston wrote of shame and regret, of the hard lessons learned working with his hands after a lifetime of privilege, of understanding, finally, the value of what I'd built and the depth of his betrayal. Bailey wrote of her struggle to rebuild, of working 2 jobs while studying, of nightmares where she returned to an empty house to find me gone. She wrote of love that persisted despite everything. And Melanie, her letter was the shortest and most devastating. I didn't love him, she wrote. I loved the reflection of myself in his eyes, younger, desired, unencumbered by responsibility. It was never about him, but about escaping who I'd become, in destroying our family. I've been forced to face that woman in the mirror without illusions. I don't ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I ask only that you don't punish our children for my failures. They were following my lead, as they always had. Direct your justified rage at me alone. I drove home in silence, the letters burning a hole in my pocket. For the first time in a year, the righteousness of my revenge fell hollow. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. Dad, it's Bailey. Mom told us she found you. I don't expect forgiveness or money or anything. I just want you to know that I understand now what real consequences are, and I'm trying to be someone you could be proud of, even if you never know it. I didn't respond, but I didn't block the number either. 3 days later, Preston appeared in my office building. Security called up, and against my better judgment, I agreed to see him. He entered cautiously, taking in the vast windows and modern furniture of Robert Dawson's domain. The past year had changed him. The pampered boy was gone, replaced by a man with calloused hands and a humbler bearing. "I won't take much of your time," he began. "I just needed to see you once, face to face, to say I'm sorry. Not for getting caught or facing consequences. For the choice I made. For valuing opportunity over loyalty. For failing as a son when you needed me most." I studied him silently, noting the construction dust on his boots, the simplicity of his clothes. "You're working in the industry," I observed. He nodded. "Started as a laborer, learning from the ground up the way you did. It's harder than I ever imagined. Makes me realize how much I took for granted." "What do you want from me, Preston?" "Nothing," he said, meeting my gaze directly. "I came to give, not take. To offer an apology that you deserve, whether you accept it or not." Something shifted in me, a tectonic movement of emotion long suppressed. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the first tremor that might eventually lead there. "You were following your mother's lead?" I said finally. "No," he countered firmly. "I was a grown man making my own choice. I chose wrong. That's on me, not her." His willingness to take full responsibility surprised me. It was unexpected maturity. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. "I thought you might want this back. I've been carrying it since we had to pack up the house." It was a picture from 20 years ago, Preston at age 2 on my shoulders at a construction site. Both of us wearing hard hats, his tiny hands gripping my forehead, both of us laughing. "Keep it," I said, pushing down a surge of emotion. "It belongs to your past, not mine." "Our past," he corrected quietly. "Whatever happens now, that moment was real." After he left, I stood at my window for a long time, looking out at the Denver skyline, but seeing only ghosts of what had been and what might have been. That evening, I called Hugh. "They found me," I said without preamble. "I know," he replied. "Neil Walsh figured it out after your conversation at the gala. He told Melanie." "You knew and didn't warn me?" Hugh sighed. "Maybe it was time, Ray. Maybe this confrontation needed to happen for all of you to move forward." "I move forward," I insisted. "Robert Dawson has no past to reconcile." "Bullshit," Hugh said bluntly. "Raymond Delacroix is still in there, carrying all that pain and rage. Until you face it head on, Robert Dawson is just a mask." His words stung because they contained truth I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I ended the call without responding. That night, I dreamed of the hospital room after my surgery, but in the dream, my family stayed. They helped me heal, supported me, showed the love I believed in for decades. I woke with tears on my face and fury in my heart. Not at them, but at myself for still carrying the wound so deeply. Chapter 9, Final Reckonings. 2 weeks after the confrontations with my former family, I stood in the boardroom of my company, finalizing plans for our most ambitious project yet, a mixed-use development that would provide affordable housing, community spaces, and small business opportunities in a neglected part of Denver. The Robert Dawson Foundation will contribute 30% of the funding, I told my executive team. The rest will come from our investment partners and municipal bonds. "This could transform the neighborhood," my lead architect commented, studying the plans. "It's exactly the kind of project that defines who we are as a company." Who we are. The phrase echoed in my mind as the meeting concluded. Robert Dawson had built something meaningful from the ashes of Raymond Delacroix's life, something perhaps more valuable than what had been lost. As I returned to my office, my assistant intercepted me. "Sir, there's a young woman waiting to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's very insistent. Says her name is Bailey." I paused, conflicting emotions warring within me. "How long has she been waiting?" "Nearly 3 hours," my assistant replied. "I told her you were in meetings all day, but she said she'd wait as long as necessary." After a moment's consideration, I nodded. Send her in. Bailey entered cautiously, her eyes taking in the office before settling on me. She looked both familiar and like a stranger, my daughter, and yet not my daughter. Thank you for seeing me, she said, remaining standing even when I gestured to a chair. I'll be brief. What can I do for you? I asked, maintaining Robert Dawson's slight southern drawl. She smiled faintly. You don't have to keep up the accent with me, but I understand if it helps maintain the distance you need. I switched back to my natural voice. Why are you here, Bailey? To thank you, she said simply. The anonymous trust for my education. I know it was you. I stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, she replied gently. The timing, the conditions, the amounts, they're too specific to be coincidence. And though you want to hate us, you still care enough to make sure I can finish school. If you came for more. I didn't, she interrupted. I came to show you this. She placed a document on my desk, her grades from community college. Straight A's across the board. I'm transferring to Colorado State in the fall, she continued. Not because it's prestigious or expensive, but because they have an excellent social work program. I want to help people who've been abandoned or betrayed by those they trusted. I've learned something about that perspective. I studied her face, searching for manipulation or deception, but found only earnest determination. Why social work? I asked despite myself. You always wanted marketing, fashion, glamorous things. I wanted those things because they seemed easy and fun, she admitted. Now, I want work that matters, that helps fix broken things. Maybe because I couldn't fix our family. Something caught in my throat. Some things can't be fixed, Bailey. I know, she said softly, but they can be acknowledged. The pain can be honored rather than ignored. That's what I'm learning to do. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mom and Preston don't know I'm here. This was just between you and me. A thank you, not an attempt to change your mind or heart. Those belong to you alone. After she left, I sat motionless, staring at her transcript on my desk. The straight A's represented more than academic achievement. They were evidence of a transformation, a consequence of consequences. That evening, I met Hugh for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the city lights. Bailey came to see me today. I told him after we'd ordered. She knew about the education trust. Hugh nodded. Smart girl. Always was. She's studying social work now. Wants to help people who've been abandoned. Interesting choice, Hugh observed neutrally. I toyed with my water glass. She thanked me, Hugh. No begging, no manipulation. Just gratitude. And how did that make you feel? I shot him an irritated glance. Don't play therapist with me. Not playing anything, he replied. Just asking a question friend to friend. I sighed, considering the truth of his question. It made me feel seen. Like someone finally understood that this wasn't just about revenge or punishment. It was about justice, consequences. And has justice been served? Hugh asked quietly. Has enough pain been inflicted to balance the scales? That's not fair, I protested. Isn't it? You crafted an elaborate plan to make them suffer as you suffered. They've lost their home, their status, their comfort. Melanie lost her husband and reputation. Preston lost his inheritance and position. They've spent a year paying for 10 days of cruelty and selfishness. At what point is the debt paid? I stared out at the city lights, considering his words. You think I should forgive them? I think, Hugh said carefully, that Robert Dawson has built something valuable and meaningful. Something that could be his legacy instead of his hiding place. I think holding on to Raymond Delacroix's pain serves no one, least of all you. And what would forgiveness even look like? I asked, genuinely uncertain. Welcome him back into my life? Pretend nothing happened? Hugh shook his head. Forgiveness doesn't mean restoration, Ray. It means releasing the active desire to see them suffer. It means allowing them, and yourself, to move forward without the weight of the past dictating every step. Later that night, standing on my penthouse balcony, I made a decision. Not about forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that, but about ending the active pursuit of retribution, about allowing natural consequences to unfold without my hand continually tipping the scales. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I want to establish 3 trusts, I instructed. 1 for Melanie Delacroix, 1 for Preston Delacroix, and 1 to formalize the existing arrangement for Bailey Delacroix. Generous ones, I assume, he asked, knowing my resources. Adequate, I corrected. Enough for Melanie to establish a modest home and living. Enough for Preston to finish his education, if he chooses. Bailey's remains for her education only. And the conditions? No contact requirements. No public acknowledgments. They receive quarterly payments regardless of their behavior toward me. That's unexpectedly unconditional, my lawyer observed. May I ask what prompted this change? I thought about Bailey's transcript, Preston's calloused hands, Melanie's direct gaze as she owned her mistakes without excuses. Justice has been served, I said simply. Continuing to pursue, it becomes something else entirely. Vengeance, he supplied. Precisely. And Robert Dawson isn't defined by vengeance. 3 days later, as I was preparing to leave for a business trip to Seattle, my security team alerted me to a visitor in the lobby. Preston. Send him up, I decided after a moment's consideration. When he entered my penthouse, he carried a toolbox and wore work clothes. Your assistant mentioned you had some cabinets that needed repair, he said by way of greeting. I'm between jobs this week. I stared at him, nonplussed. You came to fix my cabinets. He shrugged. I came to offer something I'm actually qualified to give. Not money or status or connections. Just skilled labor. The gesture, practical, humble, entirely unexpected, caught me off guard. The kitchen cabinet doors do stick, I admitted. Preston nodded and moved to the kitchen, setting down his toolbox and examining the hinges with professional focus. I watched him work skillfully, methodically, without complaint or expectation. You've learned, I observed. Starting from zero will do that, he replied without looking up. When everything's taken away, you figure out what you can actually build with your own 2 hands. As he finished adjusting the final hinge, testing the door's smooth swing, he added, Mom got notification of the trust you established. She cried for hours. It's not forgiveness, I said quickly. It's just mercy, Preston finished. We don't deserve it. We know that. He packed his tools with careful precision. The cabinets should work properly now. If they give you any more trouble, call me. No charge. It's the least I can do. After he left, I ran my hand over the smooth operation of the cabinet doors, thinking about things broken and things repaired. About mercy that wasn't forgiveness, but might someday lead there. That night, I received a text message from Melanie. Thank you for the trust. I don't deserve your kindness after my cruelty. The money will help establish a stable home, but the gesture itself means more, that perhaps someday, not now, but someday, there might be peace between us. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete the message either. 6 months later, I attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the Robert Dawson Foundation's affordable housing development. As I prepared to address the gathered crowd and press, I spotted 3 figures standing at the back, Melanie, Preston, and Bailey, watching quietly, making no attempt to approach or be acknowledged. Hugh appeared at my side. They asked me if they could come, said they wanted to witness something good you were building, even if they couldn't be part of it. I nodded slowly, processing the complexity of emotions their presence evoked. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of something that wasn't defined by pain. They can stay, I said finally. As long as they understand that Raymond Delacroix died 1.5 years ago. I'm Robert Dawson now. Hugh studied me carefully. And who exactly is Robert Dawson? Beyond the name and the accent, I looked out at the development site, the symbolic first shovel waiting to break ground on something new and hopeful. He's a man who builds things, I replied. Things that last. Things with purpose. And he doesn't define himself by what was taken from him, but by what he chooses to create. As I moved toward the podium, I felt the weight of their gazes but didn't look back. The past remained where it belonged, behind me. The future, with all its possibilities and uncertainties, lay in the foundations we were about to lay. I had survived betrayal, enacted justice, and now stood at the threshold of something new. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but freedom. Freedom from the need for revenge. Freedom to build rather than destroy. Freedom to move forward without the constant weight of looking back. In the end, that was the most ruthless revenge of all. not destroying my betrayers, but removing their power to define my future. Not forgetting what they had done, but refusing to be limited by it. And as I broke ground on the new development, I silently acknowledged what Raymond Delacroix had never understood but Robert Dawson had learned through fire. True power lies not in what we can take from others, but in what we choose to build for ourselves. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Shattered Glass. Grant Anthony stared at the hospital ceiling, counting the tiles for the 100th time. 48 hours had passed since the accident, and the sterile white squares above him had become a cruel calendar marking time he'd never get back. His son Harry lay motionless in the bed beside him, machines keeping rhythm with a heart that had fought so hard to keep beating. At 34, Grant had built himself into something unbreakable. 6'2", broad shoulders earned from years of construction work before he transitioned into project management. Hands that could fix anything except the one thing that mattered most. His colleagues at Morrison Construction respected him not just for his technical expertise, but for his ability to solve problems others couldn't even see coming. He was the man who anticipated structural failures before they happened, who could read blueprints like poetry and find flaws in seemingly perfect designs. But none of that mattered now. Harry Anthony had been riding his bike home from his best friend Tommy's house when the drunk driver ran the red light. The impact sent the 9-year-old flying 30 feet, his small body crumpling like the bicycle that now lay twisted in some police impound lot. The driver, a repeat offender named Marcus Vince, had stumbled out of his car unharmed, reeking of whiskey and legal loopholes. Mr. Anthony? Dr. Patricia Wells entered quietly, her expression telling the story before her words could. I'm sorry. We've done everything we can. Grant's wife, Sarah, sobbed into his chest as he held her, his own tears falling silently into her auburn hair. They'd been married 8 years, having met when Sarah was fresh out of nursing school, and Grant was working his way up from framing houses to managing entire developments. She'd seen his potential when he was still wearing work boots, caked in mud, believing in him when he decided to go back to school for his engineering degree. Harry had been their miracle child, born after 3 miscarriages that had nearly broken them both. Sarah couldn't have more children after Harry's difficult birth, making their son not just their first child, but their only chance at the family they dreamed of building together. The boy had inherited Grant's analytical mind and Sarah's compassionate heart. At 9, Harry was already showing signs of following in his father's footsteps, building elaborate structures with Legos and asking detailed questions about how buildings stayed standing. But more than that, he was kind. The type of kid who gave his lunch money to classmates who forgot theirs and brought injured animals home for Sarah to nurse back to health. Now he was gone, and Grant felt something fundamental shift inside him. The man who had spent his career preventing disasters had failed to protect the one thing that mattered most. As he signed the papers to donate Harry's organs, something Harry had asked about after seeing a commercial about it, Grant made a silent promise to his son. Justice would come, one way or another. Chapter 2, Words that Cut Deeper Than Knives. St. Michael's Catholic Church had never felt smaller. Grant stood at the front of the sanctuary, his black suit a stark contrast to the small white casket that seemed impossibly tiny beneath the stained glass windows. Sarah sat in the front pew, supported by her sister Dawn Godfrey, who had flown in from Seattle the moment she heard. The church was packed. Harry's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, sat with several of his classmates and their parents. Grant's crew from Morrison Construction filled an entire section, rough men in uncomfortable suits who'd taken the day off to pay their respects. Even Mr. Chun from the corner store where Harry bought comic books had come, clutching a Batman figure he'd saved for the boy. But it was the family section that made Grant's jaw clench. His mother-in-law, Pearl Hamilton, sat with her lips pursed in disapproval, as if even grief was something she found distasteful. Next to her was her daughter-in-law, Valerie Hamilton, Pearl's son Jerome's wife, whom everyone called Belly, though Grant had never been sure why. Jerome himself was conspicuously absent, claiming work obligations, though Grant suspected he was at the casino as usual. The service proceeded with Father McKenna reading from Scripture, sharing memories of Harry's short but impactful life. Sarah's tears flowed steadily, but Grant remained dry-eyed. His grief crystallized into something harder and colder. He'd cried enough in the hospital. Now he needed to be strong for Sarah, and more importantly, he needed to remember everything. Tommy Martinez, Harry's best friend, had been permitted to speak by his parents. The 8-year-old walked slowly to the podium, barely tall enough to reach the microphone. "Harry was my best friend," Tommy began, his voice small but clear. "He was really smart and really nice. He helped me with math homework and let me borrow his Nintendo games. He was going to be an engineer like his dad and build the tallest building in the world." Grant felt his throat tighten as Tommy continued, sharing memories of summer adventures and sleepovers of two boys who'd planned to be friends forever. As Tommy returned to his seat, Pearl Hamilton rose from her pew. Grant watched her approach the podium with growing unease. Pearl had never approved of Sarah marrying a construction worker who came from common stock. Even after Grant had earned his engineering degree and built his reputation, she'd found reasons to criticize him. "We gather today to mourn the loss of young Harry," Pearl began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "But in times like these, we must also remember that God works in mysterious ways. Perhaps," she paused, her cold gray eyes finding Grant's face, "perhaps this is his way of ending bad bloodlines before they can continue." The church fell dead silent. Grant felt the words hit him like physical blows, each syllable carefully chosen to wound. Around him, he could see several family members nodding in agreement, including his brother-in-law Craig Hamilton and his wife Miriam Thompson Hamilton. But Pearl wasn't finished. "Sometimes," she continued, her voice gaining strength from the murmurs of agreement, "God sees things we cannot. Some children are better off not growing up in this broken world, especially when they come from." Her eyes swept over Grant dismissively. Questionable circumstances. Grant's hands clenched into fists, but before he could respond, Tommy Martinez stood up in his pew. The 8-year-old's face was flushed with anger that seemed far too mature for his years. "That's not true," Tommy shouted, his young voice echoing through the church. "Harry was the best person I knew. And if you want to talk about bad people, should I tell everyone what Aunt Belly did to Harry before he died?" The funeral home went dead silent. Valerie Hamilton's face went white as paper. Pearl's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Grant felt every muscle in his body tense as he processed what he'd just heard. What had Valerie done to his son? Tommy's parents quickly pulled their son back down into the pew, whispering urgently in his ear. Father McKenna cleared his throat and attempted to restore order, but the damage was done. The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Grant's eyes locked onto Valerie's face, reading fear and guilt in her expression as clearly as he could read architectural blueprints. Whatever Tommy knew, whatever Valerie had done to Harry, it was real, and Grant intended to find out exactly what it was. As the service concluded and people began to file out, offering hollow condolences and avoiding eye contact, Grant made his second promise to his son. He would uncover the truth. And then, everyone who had hurt Harry, in life or in death, would face the consequences. The funeral was over, but Grant's work was just beginning. Chapter 3: Unraveling Threads. The reception at the Hamilton family home was a study in civility. Grant moved through the crowd like a predator among prey, his grief temporarily overshadowed by a burning need for answers. Sarah stayed close to Dawn, accepting condolences with the vacant politeness of the deeply wounded, while Grant observed and listened. Valerie Hamilton had disappeared shortly after Tommy's outburst, claiming she needed to check on something in the kitchen. But Grant had watched her slip out the back door, phone pressed to her ear, her voice urgent and low. He'd given her a 5-minute head start before following. The Hamilton backyard was a monument to suburban conformity. Perfectly manicured lawn, regulation flower beds, and a gazebo that Pearl had insisted would add property value. Grant found Valerie pacing near the garden shed, her conversation growing more heated by the second. "Told you this would come back to bite us," she was saying. "The kid saw everything, Jerome. What if he talks?" Grant stepped closer, using the shed as cover. Years of construction sites had taught him how to move quietly. "I don't care about your gambling debts," Valerie continued. "We have bigger problems now. If Grant finds out what really happened." She paused, listening, then exploded. "Don't you dare try to pin this all on me. You were the one who said we needed to teach the little brat a lesson." Another pause. "Fine, but if this goes sideways, I'm not going down alone." Grant's blood turned to ice. Whatever they'd done to Harry, it had been intentional. Planned. He pulled out his phone and started recording, but Valerie was already hanging up, her face pale and panicked. She turned and nearly walked into Grant's chest. "Oh, Grant, I was just getting some air. The house is so stuffy, and with all the people. What did you do to my son, Valerie?" The question hung between them like a blade. Valerie's eyes darted left and right, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "I don't know what you mean. That boy's obviously traumatized and saying things. Tommy Martinez is the most honest kid I've ever met. He doesn't lie, and he doesn't make things up. So I'll ask you again, what did you do to Harry?" For a moment, Grant thought she might confess. Her lower lip trembled, and tears formed in her eyes. But then her expression hardened, and she lifted her chin defiantly. "Your son was a spoiled little brat who thought he was better than everyone else. Just like his father. Maybe if you taught him some respect." Grant stepped forward, and Valerie immediately stepped back, bumping into the shed door. "Careful, Valerie. You're at my son's funeral, in front of my wife's family, and you've just admitted you had a problem with a 9-year-old child. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Valerie's bravado crumbled. "It wasn't supposed to hurt him," she whispered. "Jerome said we just needed to scare him, teach him not to run his mouth about things he didn't understand." "What things?" Valerie's mouth snapped shut. She'd said too much already, and they both knew it. "This conversation isn't over," Grant said quietly. "And Valerie, if I find out you or Jerome laid one finger on my boy, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in." He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Valerie shaking by the garden shed. His mind was already working, processing the fragments of information like pieces of a complex blueprint. Harry had seen something he shouldn't have. Jerome had gambling debts, and somehow that had led to them deciding to teach a lesson to a 9-year-old boy. Inside the house, Grant found Tommy Martinez sitting alone on the back porch, his small frame hunched with the weight of adult secrets. "Hey, Tommy." The boy looked up, his eyes red from crying. "Mr. Anthony? I'm sorry I yelled in church. My mom said I shouldn't have done that." Grant sat down beside him, his voice gentle. "You don't need to apologize for telling the truth, son. Can you tell me what you saw? What did Aunt Belly do to Harry?" Tommy looked around nervously, then scooted closer to Grant. "It was last week when Harry was walking home from my house. I forgot to give him back his Pokemon cards, so I ran after him. That's when I saw her." "What did you see?" "She was with that mean man. Harry said it was Uncle Jerome. They were waiting by Mr. Peterson's fence, and when Harry walked by, Uncle Jerome grabbed him really hard. He was shaking him and yelling about keeping his mouth shut about things that weren't his business." Grant's vision darkened around the edges. "Did they hurt him?" "Uncle Jerome pushed him down real hard. Harry scraped his knee on the sidewalk, and his backpack got torn. But that's not the worst part." Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Aunt Belly said if Harry ever told anyone what he saw at the casino, they'd make sure something really bad happened to him." The casino. Jerome's gambling debts. Harry seeing something he shouldn't have. "Tommy, what did Harry see at the casino?" The boy's eyes widened with fear. "I can't tell you that, Mr. Anthony. Harry made me promise not to tell anyone, even after what happened to him." Grant knelt down at Tommy's eye level. "Son, Harry can't be hurt anymore. But the people who threatened him are still out there. If you help me, I can make sure they never hurt another kid the way they hurt Harry." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Harry saw Uncle Jerome with some bad men at the casino. They were giving him money, but Harry said something wasn't right about it. He heard them talking about fixing something, and Uncle Jerome was writing stuff down on papers. Match fixing, or perhaps something worse. Jerome Hamilton was in debt to the wrong people and had gotten involved in something illegal. When Harry witnessed it, Jerome and Valerie had decided the 9-year-old was a liability. 3 days later, Harry was dead. Grant stood up slowly, his mind already formulating a plan. Jerome thought he was safe, hiding behind his mother's money and his wife's lies. But Grant had built a career on finding structural weaknesses and exploiting them. It was time to bring down the house of cards Jerome had built, one carefully placed pressure point at a time. Chapter 4. The Foundation Cracks. Grant's home office had been transformed into a war room. The walls were covered with printouts, photographs, and handwritten notes connected by red string like a detective's conspiracy board. Sarah had retreated to her sister's house in Seattle, unable to bear being in the house where Harry's laughter still echoed from every corner. Grant had encouraged her to go, knowing what he was planning would be easier to execute without worrying about her safety. It had been a week since the funeral, and Grant had used every hour to build his case. His years in construction had taught him that every structure had vulnerable points. You just had to know where to look and how much pressure to apply. Jerome Hamilton's life was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies, and Grant was methodically identifying each weak spot. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Ed Pham, Grant's poker buddy who worked in IT for the State Gaming Commission. Over beers at Murphy's Tavern, Grant had casually mentioned Jerome's frequent casino visits. Jerome Hamilton? Ed had frowned. Tall guy, thinning hair, always wearing those cheap suits? Yeah, we've been watching him. He's been flagged for suspicious betting patterns at 3 different casinos. Suspicious how? The kind that suggests he's got inside information on fixed games. Nothing we can prove yet, but the pattern is there. What? Grant had shrugged, keeping his voice casual. Just curious. Guy's married to my sister-in-law. Now, armed with that information, Grant was digging deeper. He'd spent the morning at the county courthouse, poring over public records. Jerome's financial situation was even worse than Grant had suspected. 3 mortgages on the family home, maxed-out credit cards, and a trail of small loans from increasingly dubious sources. But it was the property records that provided the most interesting revelation. Jerome had recently taken out a 4th mortgage on his mother's house, without Pearl's knowledge, if the forged signatures were any indication. Grant photographed everything, building a comprehensive file of Jerome's crimes. But financial fraud wasn't enough. He needed evidence of what they'd done to Harry. His phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Martinez's mother. "Tommy wants to tell you something else. Can you come by after school?" An hour later, Grant sat in the Martinez family living room, waiting as 8-year-old Tommy gathered his courage. "Harry showed me something before he died," Tommy finally said. He said he was scared, but he didn't know who to tell. The boy disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a small digital camera, the kind kids use for school projects. "Harry gave me this the day before what happened. He said if something bad happened to him, I should give it to you." Grant's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the camera. The first few photos were typical kid shots, playground antics, pictures of pets, selfies with Tommy. But then he found them. 3 clear photographs of Jerome Hamilton meeting with 2 men in an alley behind the Riverside Casino. The timestamp showed they were taken the week before Harry's death. In the first photo, one of the men was handing Jerome a thick envelope. In the second, Jerome was showing them some kind of document. In the third, the most damning, Jerome was photographed accepting what appeared to be a substantial amount of cash. Harry said he followed Uncle Jerome because he heard him and Aunt Belly fighting about money, Tommy explained. He wanted to help, but when he saw those men, he got scared and hid. He said they looked mean. Grant recognized the men from mug shots he'd found online. Marcus Delacroix and his enforcer, Tony the Brick Salvatore, mid-level criminals with connections to illegal gambling operations throughout the state. If Jerome was taking money from them, he was in deeper than simple gambling addiction. "Tommy, Did Harry ever tell you what was on the paper Jerome was showing these men? The boy nodded. Harry was really good at reading upside down. He said it looked like lists of names and numbers, like maybe sports teams or something. Harry thought Uncle Jerome might be cheating at games. Point shaving. Jerome was providing inside information about local sports events to fixers, taking payment from organized crime figures, and using his access to Pearl's social circles to gather intelligence on which games were most vulnerable to manipulation. Grant's engineering mind began constructing the perfect collapse. Jerome's house of cards was more precarious than he'd realized, and Grant now had the leverage to bring it all down. But he needed one more piece of the puzzle. That evening, Grant drove to the Riverside Casino. He wasn't there to gamble. He was there to observe. Using the techniques he'd learned from years of accident investigation, he positioned himself where he could watch the security cameras and staff rotations. Within an hour, he'd identified the inside man Jerome was working with, Stanley Kinney, a pit boss with access to game schedules and player information. Grant photographed Stanley meeting with Jerome in the parking lot, exchanging what appeared to be folded papers for an envelope. The picture was becoming clear. Jerome was providing Stanley with information about which players would be at which tables, allowing the fixers to target specific games. In return, he received payment from Delacroix's organization, money he desperately needed to service his growing debts. Harry had witnessed one of these exchanges and, being an intelligent kid, had realized something wasn't right. Jerome and Valerie's solution had been to threaten a 9-year-old into silence. 3 days later, Harry was dead in a random accident. Grant drove home through the rain, his mind working like a precision instrument. He had evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and intimidation. He had photographs, financial records, and witness testimony. Most importantly, he had a plan that would ensure Jerome, Valerie, and everyone who had hurt Harry would face justice. But not the kind of justice that came from courtrooms and lawyers. Grant had spent his career building things that lasted. Now, he was going to engineer the perfect demolition. As he pulled into his empty driveway, Grant looked up at Harry's bedroom window and made his final promise to his son. "I'm going to take them all down, buddy. Every single one of them." The foundation work was complete. Now, it was time to start applying pressure to the structural weak points. Chapter 5. Engineering the Perfect Storm. Grant's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., but he'd already been awake for an hour, his mind running calculations like a computer processing complex equations. Today marked the beginning of the endgame, and every detail had to be perfect. The first call came at 5:15 a.m., right on schedule. Grant answered on the second ring, keeping his voice groggy and confused. "Grant, it's Detective Reynolds. I'm sorry to call so early, but we need to talk about your son's case." Detective Janet Reynolds was a 20-year veteran of the police force, known for her methodical approach to cold cases. Grant had met her once during the initial investigation into Harry's death, noting her sharp intellect and unwillingness to accept simple explanations. "Of course, Detective. Has something new come up?" "Several things, actually. Can you meet me at the station this morning? There are some developments you need to know about." Grant had spent 2 weeks carefully cultivating Detective Reynolds' interest in Harry's case, feeding her information in ways that seemed coincidental. A chance encounter at the coffee shop where he'd mentioned his concerns about Jerome's behavior. A casual comment about Tommy Martinez having more information than he'd initially shared. Seeds planted with the patience of an experienced engineer. At the police station, Detective Reynolds led Grant to a small conference room where files and photographs covered every available surface. "Mr. Anthony, I've been reviewing your son's death, and I'm starting to have questions about the timeline. Specifically, about what happened in the days leading up to the accident." She spread out a series of photographs, crime scene shots, traffic camera footage, and witness statements. Tommy Martinez finally felt comfortable enough to give us a formal statement about what he witnessed. He's also provided us with some very interesting photographs. Grant examined the images, allowing his face to show the appropriate shock and recognition. "That's Jerome, my sister-in-law's husband. Who are those men with him?" "Marcus Delacroix and Anthony Salvatore. Both have extensive criminal records related to illegal gambling operations. According to our investigation, They've been running a point-shaving scheme involving college basketball games, and your brother-in-law appears to be their inside man at several casinos. Detective Reynolds leaned forward. Here's where it gets interesting. Jerome Hamilton has significant gambling debts, over $200,000 according to our financial investigation. He's been working with these men to fix games, providing inside information in exchange for debt relief and cash payments. But what does this have to do with Harry? According to Tommy's statement, Harry witnessed one of these exchanges and photographed it. 3 days later, Jerome and his wife confronted Harry, threatening him if he talked about what he'd seen. Grant's jaw clenched with genuine emotion. They threatened my son? It appears so. And Mr. Anthony. Detective Reynolds paused, choosing her words carefully. We've been investigating the circumstances of Harry's accident. The driver who hit him, Marcus Vince, has connections to the same criminal network your brother-in-law was involved with. This was the piece Grant hadn't expected, the one variable he hadn't accounted for in his calculations. Are you saying Harry's death wasn't an accident? I'm saying we're treating it as a homicide investigation now. Jerome Hamilton, Valerie Hamilton, and several others are going to be arrested today on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit fraud to accessory to murder. Grant allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 of his plan was complete, but it was only the beginning. That afternoon, Grant received a call from Dawn Godfrey, Sarah's sister in Seattle. Grant, I just saw the news. Jerome and Valerie were arrested? What's going on? The police discovered they were involved in illegal gambling operations. It looks like Harry might have witnessed something he shouldn't have. There was a long pause. Grant, Sarah doesn't know yet. She's been doing so well in therapy, starting to process the grief in a healthy way. This is going to devastate her. Then don't tell her yet. Let the legal process run its course first. Another pause. Grant, there's something else. Pearl called me this morning, completely hysterical. Apparently, Jerome had taken out loans against her house without her knowledge. She's facing foreclosure. Perfect. Grant had been counting on this development. That's terrible. Pearl's been through so much already. She's asking family members to help with the mortgage payments. I know money is tight for you and Sarah right now, but actually, I might be able to help. I've been looking into some investment opportunities. Real estate, specifically. That evening, Grant met with his lawyer, Philip Conway, at his downtown office. Philip had been a friend since college, before Grant had switched from pre-law to engineering. Now he ran a successful practice specializing in commercial real estate and contract law. You want to buy Pearl Hamilton's house? Philip asked, reviewing the documents Grant had provided. The same Pearl Hamilton who made those comments at your son's funeral? It's a solid investment. The house is worth at least $400,000, but with the foreclosure proceedings, I can probably get it for $250,000. Property values in that neighborhood are only going to increase. Philip studied the paperwork more carefully. Grant, this is your mother-in-law's house. Even if it's a good investment, the family dynamics will work themselves out. Pearl needs money to save her house. I have money to lend. It's a simple business transaction. And the fact that you'll own the mortgage on the house where the woman who insulted your dead son lives. Grant's smile was cold and calculating. Like I said, Phil, property values are only going to increase. 3 hours later, Grant had the contracts drawn up and signed. Pearl Hamilton, desperate to save her home and avoid homelessness at 73, had agreed to terms that were far more favorable to Grant than to her. But the house was only the first domino. Grant's real target was the entire Hamilton family structure, and he was just getting started. As he drove home past the cemetery where Harry was buried, Grant rolled down the windows and let the cool evening air fill the car. Phase 2 complete, buddy, he said softly. Tomorrow we start building the future you deserve to see. Chapter 6, The Architecture of Justice. Grant stood in Pearl Hamilton's living room, surveying the space with the calculating eye of a professional. The house was a 1960s colonial with good bones, but decades of deferred maintenance. The hardwood floors were warped in several places, the electrical system was outdated, and the plumbing made concerning noises when water ran through the pipes. As I explained on the phone, Mrs. Hamilton, the house needs significant work to meet current safety codes, Grant said, consulting his clipboard of inspection notes. The electrical panel is a fire hazard, the foundation has settling issues, and don't get me started on the asbestos in the basement insulation. Pearl Hamilton sat rigidly in her favorite chair, the same one she'd occupied during family gatherings where she'd made cutting remarks about Grant's background and prospects. At 73, she was still a formidable woman, but the arrest of her son and the financial crisis had aged her considerably. I don't have money for repairs, Grant. You know that. That's why I had to sell you the mortgage in the first place. I understand your position, but as the new mortgage holder, I have certain responsibilities to maintain the property value. The city inspector is coming next week, and if these issues aren't addressed, we could be looking at condemnation proceedings. This was a lie, but Pearl didn't know that. Grant had learned long ago that fear was a powerful motivator, and Pearl Hamilton was afraid of losing the only home she'd ever known. What are you suggesting? Grant consulted his notes again, drawing out the moment. The repairs will cost approximately $85,000. That's more than the current equity you have in the house. However, I might be willing to cover the costs in exchange for certain adjustments to our agreement. What kind of adjustments? I'll handle all the repairs and improvements at my own expense. In exchange, I'll need you to sign over full ownership of the property to me. You can continue living here rent-free for as long as you maintain the property according to my specifications. Pearl's face went white. You want me to sign over my house? I want to help you, Mrs. Hamilton. The alternative is foreclosure, and at your age, finding affordable housing will be challenging. Grant watched Pearl process the implications. She was trapped, and they both knew it. Without her son's income and facing massive legal bills, she had no other options. The house that had been her source of pride and security was now an anchor dragging her down. I'll need time to think about it. Of course, but the city inspection is scheduled for next Wednesday. If the violations aren't addressed by then, Grant left the sentence hanging as he gathered his papers. Pearl Hamilton, who had spent years looking down on him as beneath her family's standards, was now completely dependent on his mercy. And Grant was fresh out of mercy for people who had hurt his son. That evening, Grant met Craig Carr at Donovan's Steakhouse, one of the city's most expensive restaurants. Craig was Jerome's gambling buddy and, according to Grant's investigation, another small player in the point-shaving scheme that had gotten Harry killed. Grant, man, I can't believe what happened to Jerome and Valerie. This whole thing is insane. Craig cut into his steak nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the dinner invitation. It's certainly been a shock to the family. But I asked you here because I think you might be able to help with something. Help with what? Grant signaled the waiter for another bottle of wine, keeping his voice casual. Jerome's legal troubles are going to be expensive. The family is trying to raise money for his defense, and I know you two were close. I was hoping you might consider contributing to his legal fund. Craig nearly choked on his wine. Grant, I'm flattered you'd ask, but I don't really have that kind of money. That's interesting, because according to the bank records the police subpoenaed, you made several large cash deposits over the past 6 months. Deposits that correspond exactly with the dates Jerome was receiving payments from his gambling contacts. The color drained from Craig's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Grant smiled pleasantly and pulled out a manila folder. Photo surveillance from the Riverside Casino showing you meeting with Stanley Kenny. Financial records showing payments from offshore accounts linked to Marcus Delacroix. And most importantly, cell phone records showing you called Jerome 15 minutes before Harry's accident. Craig's hand trembled as he reached for his wine glass. What do you want? I want you to disappear, Craig. Tonight, pack a bag, get in your car, and drive until you run out of road. Because tomorrow morning, I'm turning all of this evidence over to Detective Reynolds, and she's going to have some very pointed questions about your role in my son's death. I didn't know they were going to hurt the kid, Grant. I swear to God, I thought they were just going to scare him. The admission hung between them like a death sentence. Craig had just confessed to prior knowledge of the threat against Harry. You had a choice, Craig. You could have warned me, called the police, or simply walked away from Jerome's scheme. Instead, you chose money over the life of a 9-year-old boy. Grant stood up and dropped $200 bills on the table. You've got a 12-hour head start. I suggest you use it wisely. As Craig stumbled out of the restaurant, Grant felt the satisfaction of another domino falling. By morning, Craig would be running, adding another fugitive charge to his growing legal problems and eliminating Jerome's most important witness. The next day brought the news Grant had been expecting. Miriam Thompson Hamilton, Jerome's sister-in-law, called in a panic. "Grant, I just heard about Craig disappearing. The police think he was involved in Jerome's gambling scheme. This is getting worse by the day. I'm sure it will all work out, Miriam. But that's not why I'm calling. Phil has been arrested." Grant allowed himself a moment of confusion. Phil who? Phil O'Neill, Pearl's financial advisor. Apparently, he's been embezzling money from her investment accounts for years. Pearl just found out she's lost almost everything. This was unexpected, but convenient. Grant had been planning to target Phil eventually, but having him arrested for separate crimes saved Grant the trouble. How much did she lose? Everything, Grant. Her retirement savings, the life insurance money from when Harold died, even the emergency fund she kept for medical expenses. Phil convinced her to invest in some fake cryptocurrency scheme and pocketed the money. Perfect. Pearl Hamilton was now completely destitute, dependent entirely on Grant's charity to avoid homelessness. The woman who had declared Harry's death a blessing from God was now at the mercy of Harry's father. Grant hung up the phone and walked to his office window, looking out at the city skyline he'd helped build. Each crane on the horizon represented a project he'd managed, a structure he'd engineered to last for generations. Now, he was engineering something different. A perfect system of justice that would ensure everyone who had wronged Harry faced consequences appropriate to their crimes. Phase 3 was nearly complete. Soon, it would be time for the final act. Chapter 7. Controlled Demolition. The Hamilton family gathering was smaller than it had been in years. Pearl sat at the head of her dining room table, the same table where she'd hosted countless family dinners filled with passive-aggressive comments about Grant's worthiness. But now the power dynamic had shifted completely. Jerome remained in county jail, awaiting trial on charges that would likely send him away for 15 to 20 years. Valerie had been released on bond, but was staying with her mother, too ashamed to face the family she'd helped destroy. Craig had been captured in Nevada and was fighting extradition while his assets were frozen by federal investigators. Grant sat at Pearl's right hand, exactly where Harold Hamilton used to sit before his death 5 years earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. As I was explaining, Grant continued, reviewing the papers spread across the table. The foundation issues are more serious than we initially thought. The entire east wall is compromised, and the city engineer is recommending immediate evacuation until repairs can be completed. This was another lie, but Grant had become skilled at weaponizing bureaucracy. A few calls to contacts in the building department, some strategically placed donations to the right retirement funds, and suddenly Pearl's house was facing a list of violations that existed only on paper. "How long will the repairs take?" asked Don Godfrey, who had flown in from Seattle to help Pearl navigate the crisis. 6 to 8 months, minimum. The foundation work alone will take 3 months, and then we'll need to address the electrical, plumbing, and HVAC systems. "Pearl, I hate to say this, but you're going to need somewhere else to stay." Pearl's hand shook as she reached for her water glass. "I don't have anywhere else to go." "Actually, you do." Grant pulled out another set of documents. "I've been looking into senior living facilities in the area. Sunset Manor has an opening, and I'm prepared to cover the costs as part of our mortgage agreement." Sunset Manor was the worst-rated nursing home in the county, with a long history of health code violations and patient neglect complaints. It was also the only facility Grant was willing to pay for. "Grant," Dawn said carefully, "surely there are better options." "On Pearl's budget?" "I'm afraid not. The other facilities require substantial deposits and have waiting lists. Sunset Manor is available immediately." Pearl looked around the table at the faces of family members who had once deferred to her authority. Now, they were all looking to Grant for answers, recognizing that he held all the cards. "What about staying with family?" Pearl asked desperately. "Dawn, couldn't I come to Seattle until—" "Mom, you know our apartment isn't set up for that. And with the kids' school schedules." Grant watched Pearl realize that none of her children were going to rescue her. The same woman who had raised them to value financial success above all else was learning that money was the only thing that mattered to them in return. "Sunset Manor it is," Pearl said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Later that evening, Grant drove to the cemetery where Harry was buried. The small headstone was simple but elegant. Harry Anthony, beloved son, gone too soon. Sarah had chosen the inscription before leaving for Seattle, and Grant visited every day to tell his son about the progress of his mission. "Pearl signed the papers today, buddy," Grant said, kneeling by the grave. "She'll be in that nursing home by next week, and the house will be mine. I'm thinking about turning it into a youth center, maybe a place where kids can go after school to be safe." A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree Harry had loved to climb in their backyard. Grant took it as a sign of approval. Jerome's trial starts next month. The prosecutor says he's looking at 25 years, especially since they found evidence linking him to 3 other point-shaving schemes. Valerie's cooperating, so she might get off with just 5 to 10. And Craig, well, Craig's going to spend a long time wishing he'd kept his mouth shut. Grant stood up and brushed dirt from his knees. "Tomorrow I deal with Stanley Kinney and those casino friends of Jerome's. The prosecutor wants them on RICO charges, but I want them to know exactly why their lives are falling apart." The next morning, Grant sat in the visitors section of the county courthouse, watching as Stanley Kinney was arraigned on 17 counts of conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. The pit boss who had provided Jerome with insider information looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit. His confidence evaporated now that he faced federal charges. As Stanley was led away in shackles, he caught sight of Grant in the gallery. Their eyes met for a moment, and Grant saw recognition dawn on the man's face. Stanley had finally figured out who had been methodically dismantling his life over the past month. Grant smiled and gave him a small wave. Outside the courthouse, Detective Reynolds approached Grant with a satisfied expression. "Mr. Anthony, I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Without your information about Jerome's activities, we never would have uncovered the full scope of this conspiracy. I just wanted justice for my son, Detective." "Well, you're getting it. Jerome Hamilton will never see the outside of a prison cell. Marcus Delacroix and his associates are facing RICO charges that will put them away for life. And we've identified at least 6 other victims who were threatened or intimidated by this organization." Grant nodded gravely. "What about the man who killed Harry? Marcus Vince. His trial is next week. With the evidence we've gathered about the conspiracy, the prosecutor is confident he can prove this was a planned murder, not a drunk driving accident. Vince is looking at life without parole. Justice." The word had lost all meaning during the weeks after Harry's death, when Grant had felt powerless to protect his son even in death. But now, watching Jerome's co-conspirators being led away in handcuffs, the word was beginning to mean something again. But Grant wasn't finished. There was still one more person who needed to understand exactly what it meant to threaten Harry Anthony. As he walked to his car, Grant pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized weeks ago. "Tony Salvatore, this is Grant Anthony. I think it's time we had a conversation about my son." The final act was about to begin. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Tony, the brick Salvatore agreed to meet at the abandoned Morrison construction site on the outskirts of town, the same location where Grant had once built dreams of the future with his bare hands. Now, it would serve as the setting for a very different kind of construction project. Grant arrived first, as he'd known he would. He'd chosen this location carefully, isolated enough for privacy, but familiar enough that he controlled every advantage. The half-finished office building loomed against the evening sky like a concrete skeleton, its exposed rebar reaching toward the stars like desperate fingers. Tony arrived exactly on time, which surprised Grant. Most criminals were either early out of paranoia or late out of arrogance. But Tony Salvatore moved with the measured confidence of a man who'd survived 20 years in a dangerous profession by being predictable only in his professionalism. "Grant Anthony," Tony said, stepping out of his Lincoln Continental. "I've been hearing a lot about you lately." Grant studied the man who had helped orchestrate his son's death. Tony was shorter than expected, maybe 5'8", but built like a concrete block with hands that looked capable of breaking bones with minimal effort. His expensive suit couldn't hide the predatory stillness that marked him as genuinely dangerous. "And I've been hearing about you, Mr. Salvatore. 37 arrests, 14 convictions, and a reputation for solving problems permanently. Problems like 9-year-old boys who see too much." The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Grant felt his carefully controlled anger flare, but kept his voice level. "My son wasn't a problem. He was a child who witnessed your criminal activity and paid for it with his life." Tony lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his weathered face. "Kid shouldn't have been taking pictures where he didn't belong. Jerome told us the boy was dangerous, that he was going to bring down the whole operation. So you had him killed." "I had a drunk driver aimed in the right direction at the right time. Clean, random, no connections to trace back. If Marcus Vince hadn't been such an amateur, your boy's death would have stayed an accident." Grant felt something cold settle in his chest. The casual admission of Harry's murder, delivered with no more emotion than a weather report, crystallized his resolve. "You made a mistake, Tony." "What's that?" "You killed the son of an engineer." "Do you know what engineers do for a living, Tony? We build things. Complex things. Systems that work together in ways most people can't understand." Tony flicked his cigarette away, finally showing the first sign of wariness. "What's your point?" "My point is that over the past month, I've been building something special. A system designed specifically to destroy you and everyone you work with. Jerome's in prison. Craig's facing federal charges. Stanley's looking at 20 years. Marcus Delacroix's entire organization is under RICO investigation." Grant began walking slowly around the construction site, forcing Tony to turn to follow his movement. "But that's just the beginning. You see, I've been studying your operation, Mr. Salvatore, learning about your territories, your income sources, your methods of operation." "Studying me? For instance, I know about your arrangement with the docks union. Specifically how you've been skimming money from pension funds to finance your gambling operations. I know about the protection racket you run in Little Italy and how you've been underreporting income to both the IRS and your own bosses in the Marconi family." Tony's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, but Grant continued talking, his voice gaining confidence. "I also know about the photographs." This stopped Tony cold. "What photographs?" Grant pulled out an envelope and scattered its contents on a nearby concrete barrier. Even in the dim light, the images were clear. Tony meeting with FBI agent David Phillips in what appeared to be clandestine circumstances. "Interesting thing about surveillance technology these days," Grant said conversationally. "High-definition cameras, telephoto lenses, facial recognition software. A man with the right connections can document quite a lot of interesting activities." Tony picked up one of the photographs, his expression growing darker. "These are fakes." "Are they?" Agent Phillips might disagree. "You see, I had a very interesting conversation with him last week. Seems he's been developing sources within the Marconi family, and your name came up as someone who might be cooperative in exchange for certain considerations." This was Grant's masterpiece, a lie built on enough truth to be believable. Agent Phillips was real, and he was working organized crime cases. The photographs were real too, but they showed Tony meeting with a different federal agent about an unrelated investigation. Grant had simply engineered the context to suggest betrayal. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Tony, how do you think I got access to detailed information about Jerome's operation? How do you think I knew exactly which evidence to give Detective Reynolds? Someone inside your organization has been feeding information to law enforcement for months." Grant watched as paranoia began to eat away at Tony's confidence. In organized crime, the suggestion of betrayal was often more dangerous than actual betrayal. "The beauty of it," Grant continued, "is that even if you kill me right now, the damage is already done. Copies of these photographs are already in the hands of Vincent Marconi, along with detailed financial records showing how much money you've been skimming from family operations." Tony's face had gone pale. Vincent Marconi was notoriously paranoid about traitors within his organization, and suspected informants had a tendency to disappear permanently. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something, Tony. You killed my son because you thought he was a threat to your operation. But Harry wasn't the threat. I am. Grant began walking back toward his truck, leaving Tony standing among the scattered photographs. You have 48 hours to disappear, Mr. Salvatore. After that, Vincent Marconi is going to receive a very detailed package about your activities, and I suspect his response will be definitive. This isn't over, Anthony. Grant paused at his truck door. Yes, it is. You just don't realize it yet. As he drove away, Grant could see Tony in his rearview mirror, frantically gathering up the photographs that would probably get him killed within the week. The man who had ordered Harry's death was now facing the same terror Harry must have felt in those final moments before the drunk driver's car struck him. But unlike Harry, Tony Salvatore deserved everything that was coming for him. Grant's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Package delivered to VM. Your boy is avenged. A friend. Grant smiled and deleted the message. Sometimes the best engineering was knowing which structures to build and which ones to let collapse under their own weight. Tony Salvatore's world was about to come down around his ears, and Grant Anthony wouldn't lose a moment's sleep over it. Chapter 9. Building Something Beautiful. 6 months later, Grant stood in the transformed space that had once been Pearl Hamilton's house, watching as a group of children worked on homework at tables that had been carefully engineered for their height and needs. The Harry Anthony Youth Center had officially opened 3 weeks earlier, and it was already serving 45 children from the surrounding neighborhood. Sarah had returned from Seattle the previous month, her grief still present, but no longer the crushing weight that had driven her away. Therapy had helped her process not just Harry's death, but the revelation of what Jerome and Valerie had done to their son. She now served as the center's volunteer coordinator, channeling her nursing skills into caring for children who needed safe spaces after school. Mr. Anthony? Tommy Martinez approached hesitantly, a math worksheet in his small hands. Can you help me with this problem? Grant knelt down to Tommy's level, examining the fractions worksheet with the same careful attention he once gave to architectural blueprints. What part is giving you trouble? I don't understand how to add fractions with different denominators. Grant smiled and pulled out a pencil. Let me show you something my son Harry taught me. He said fractions are like building blocks. You just have to make sure they're all the same size before you can stack them together. As they worked through the problem, Grant reflected on the changes that had transformed his life over the past year. Jerome Hamilton had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy charges. Valerie had received 8 years and would be eligible for parole in 5. Both had lost their parental rights to their 2 children, who were now living with Valerie's sister in Oregon. Pearl Hamilton had lasted 3 months in Sunset Manor before suffering a stroke that left her requiring full-time care. Grant had quietly arranged for her transfer to a better facility, paying the difference in cost out of his own pocket. Despite everything she'd put him through, he couldn't bring himself to let an elderly woman suffer unnecessarily. Marcus Delacroix and his remaining associates had been convicted on RICO charges and were now serving life sentences in federal prison. Stanley Kinney had cooperated with prosecutors and received a reduced sentence of 12 years. Tony Salvatore had simply vanished. His car had been found in a long-term parking garage at the airport, but there was no record of him boarding any flights. Detective Reynolds suspected he'd been killed by his own associates, but his body had never been recovered. Grant had no idea what had actually happened to Tony, and he didn't want to know. The man who had murdered Harry, Marcus Vince, was serving life without parole in the state penitentiary. Grant had attended every day of his trial, watching as the evidence of conspiracy transformed a drunk driving case into a first-degree murder conviction. I think I understand now, Tommy said, showing Grant his completed worksheet. You have to find a common denominator first. Then everything else makes sense. Exactly right. Sometimes in math, just like in life, you have to change how you're looking at the problem before you can solve it. Tommy beamed with pride and ran off to show his work to Sarah, who was helping another child with a science project. Grant watched his wife smile, genuinely smile, for the first time since Harry's death. That evening, Grant drove to the cemetery for his weekly visit with Harry. The simple headstone now had company. a small garden that Sarah had planted with Harry's favorite flowers, and a bench where parents could sit and remember their own lost children. "The center's doing really well, buddy," Grant said, settling onto the bench with the ease of long practice. "We've got a waiting list now, and the city council approved funding for a computer lab. Tommy's helping us design it. He says you would have one of the fastest gaming computers we could afford." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers Sarah had planted, carrying the scent of spring growth and new beginnings. "Your mom's pregnant again." Grant had been saving this news for weeks, wanting to process it himself before sharing it with Harry. Sarah was 12 weeks along, and the doctors said everything looked healthy and normal. "I know what you're thinking. We're too old to be starting over. But sometimes life gives you second chances you didn't know you needed. Your little sister is due in October, and we're going to name her Hope." Grant looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "I kept my promise, Harry. Everyone who hurt you faced justice. Jerome and Valerie are in prison where they belong. The men who ordered your death are either dead or locked away forever. And Pearl, well, Pearl is learning what it means to depend on the kindness of others." But revenge, Grant had discovered, was a cold comfort compared to the warmth of building something positive from tragedy. The youth center was serving children who needed safe places to learn and grow. Sarah was healing and building new dreams. And somewhere in the future, a little girl named Hope would grow up hearing stories about her big brother who had been gone too long, but was never forgotten. "I have to go now, son. Sarah's making dinner, and we have plans to review for the center's expansion. But I'll see you next week, same as always." Grant stood up and brushed dirt from his pants, then paused to read the inscription on Harry's headstone one more time. "Beloved son, gone too soon." "Not gone," Grant said softly. "Just building something beautiful on the other side, waiting for the rest of us to catch up." As he walked back to his truck, Grant felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year: peace. Harry's death had been a tragedy that could never be undone, but from that tragedy